Hi, so I was meaning to make this video for, I don't know, probably the last 4 weeks, and I've put it off because I've been very busy. I want to just talk about my home birth and how everything kind of went down. But my pregnancy was like so smooth. I really didn't have any problems at all. Eleanor was measuring pretty small most of the pregnancy, but it was still in the category. It was probably only like 1 to 2 centimeters under, which was fine. She was born at 6 pounds 14 ounces, which is 3.14 kilos. I organised my midwife when I was about 16 weeks because it was a surprise pregnancy. I obviously didn't have any plans in beforehand, and originally the first midwife that I'd chosen was booked out, and I was a bit unsure of where to go, so I contacted my sister, who's had 6 children, having her 7th, has had 2 home births and a free birth, so I had a lot to learn from her. And she got me on to a lady called Angela Gallo, who then got me on to the service that I used, which was Mama Services in Melbourne, Australia. My primary midwife's name was Rachel, and I could have never imagined having anyone else at my birth. She was just wonderful. When I got to 40 weeks, had not had really any sign of a contraction whatsoever, and I had predicted that she was going to be born on the 18th of November because it was a new moon and my body's pretty in line with the moon and everything. Anyway, that Saturday morning, it was like 2:30 a.m, I had this pain, and it was different to anything else that I'd had the whole pregnancy, and I was kind of like, oh, maybe this is it. But it wasn't that strong, and I kind of went back to sleep, and every now and then I wake up again and I was having the same pain. I was like, And then I got up in the morning and said something to Mum, and she was like, oh, just see how you go. My contractions were different to what they've been described to me. I didn't have like the tightening of the stomach, or I didn't really have menstrual cramp type pains. I could like physically feel my cervix stretching, and that's where all the pain was coming from, where my cervix was. I could just feel it like coming open like that, as strange as it sounds. So I kind of knew pretty well straight away that I was going into labour, but the first day it was like pretty easy. Like they weren't that bad. Every time I would go to do something, like go down to the supermarket, something new would happen, and we thought that it was going to progress a lot quicker than it did. My mucus plug came out like 11 or 12 during the day on Saturday, and then everything eased on. It still wasn't like, it was maybe 2 in 15 or 2 in 20 minutes I was having contractions. So we all sort of stayed up. Myself, my sister, my best friend visited on the Saturday after being away for 8 months, and she pretty much didn't leave my house until the baby was born. My mum was there and Eleanor's dad was there, and we basically sat around the couch and just watched movie after movie most of Saturday. We stayed up for quite a while on Saturday night, and then eventually when I realised things weren't getting much more full on, I went to bed, and most of the others had gone to bed as well. Sunday was a little bit more full on, but still not very much so I went through all of Sunday thinking that today was going to be the day, but it wasn't. So my midwife Rachel came around Sunday afternoon just to check the progress. She stayed for a few hours, and then she checked me just to see where I was at, and I was 2 centimeters. That was probably 11 o'clock on Sunday night, and I did feel a little bit disheartened because I've been going through something for the last 2 days, and I was like, oh, surely, considering it's been 2 days, that something would have progressed by now. So I was a little bit disappointed, but try not to get too down, because I knew that a lot of the progress had already been done. And in hindsight, I now understand the role of pre-early labour. It is like the cervix actually shrinking, and then the hard part is when it's opening like that. But what you don't realise is the first sort of half of labour is actually that shrinking of the cervix. So even though I was disheartened, at the same time I was going, look, I've done a lot of it now. There's not a great deal to go. So Rachel went home after she'd checked me and just said, ring me if you need to talk to me about anything. If you feel like it's getting more full on, give me a call. But I'm going to go home and get some rest. So that was fine. She left. I went to bed. And then I woke up Monday morning at about 2:15, and I was still having contractions, but they had gotten a lot heavier. And I got up out of bed because I couldn't lie down any longer and went into the lounge room, and I had this little stool that was sitting in front of the TV, and everyone else was asleep. I just got up and was leaning on this stool, and I went through about 3 contractions, just bawling my eyes out. And eventually Mum woke up, and she was lying on the couch, so she was like a couple of meters away, and she looked at me and she could see that I was crying, and she walked over. I'm like, I'm not crying at anything, I'm just exhausted. And then I probably cried for another 10 minutes and then got up and I was fine. And it was like everything kind of shifted then, and it picked up, and I could tell the contractions were different because I was, you know, sort of just breathing through them before, whereas now I really needed to use my voice and groan. I groaned a lot during that Monday, which was obviously active labour. So I rang Rachel at about 3 o'clock and said that things had picked up, and she listened to me going through a couple of contractions on the phone, and she's like, yeah, you've definitely progressed since I last spoke to you. Give it another hour and see how you're going, and then ring me back again, and if they're still going like this, then I'll make my way down. And she lives about 45 minutes away from me, so I rang her again at about, that must have been 3:30. I rang her again about 4:30 and said, look, they're still going the way they are. They're about 2 in 10, 3 in 10, they kind of vary. So she made her way down. She wasn't there until about 5:30, and I just sort of kept going that way, and it kept going that way for a while. Just before Rachel arrived, I had my first shower since being in labour, and it was the most relieving thing ever. I think I ended up spending like a few hours collectively in the shower because it was such a relief, and the water pressure on my back just kind of distracted me during contractions. So I was in and out of the shower probably 5 or 6 times. And she checked me again, I think it must have been about 7 or 8 AM, and I was 3 centimetres, and I was so disappointed because I'd gone through a whole night and this massive shift in my contractions, and I'd only dilated 1 centimetre. So again, I tried not to get too disheartened because I knew that everything was going to progress from then on, and she was reasonably happy. She said, look, you're getting there, it's going to take a little bit more time. So I spent the next few hours just on the football, or I was leaning forward on the stool on the ground with my legs sort of like a parted position so that everything was open. And I wasn't there, I was sitting on the toilet, and I was going through contractions on the toilet because again everything was so open. And when I started to get too tired, when they started to get on top of me, I would just lie down on the couch and go through a few on the couch on my side. And I suppose I could tell pretty well when my body was getting tired, because I would just go, look, I can't deal with anymore, I need to lie down for, I don't know, 15-20 minutes and just do a few on the couch, and then I'll get back up and try again. And every time Rachel would suggest something to me, I was like, okay, well, let's just do it. She obviously knows what she's talking about. So Rachel would suggest that I tried different positions to go through contractions, and sometimes she had me in a squatting position where I was supported like this and squatting, and all the downward force was on my cervix and helped open it up, and it worked quite well. It was so painful, and I could probably only do 4 or 5 at a time before having to lie down on the couch, but I think they made a pretty big difference. I could feel it. So around 2 o'clock Rachel checked me again, and I was 7.5 centimetres, but I was stretchy, so I would stretch out to 8 centimetres, and she was happy with that. So it was time to fill the birth pool. So I left and went out and had a few more contractions leaning against the bench top with Mum massaging my back, and waited for the birth pool to fill. In the meantime, I had a few things to eat because I had like hardly eaten anything. I had a few blueberries, and like, yeah, it must have just been the blueberries. I had maybe 5, and within 5 minutes I was throwing them back up again. And Rachel came running in and she's like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm fine. I just had a bit of a chuck. And she's like, that's a really good sign. That means everything's progressing. I was like, yes, finally. So then we headed to Mum and Dad's ensuite, where the birth pool was full. I think it had just been filled. And I stripped off and got ready to jump in. I had a bit of support to get in. And as soon as I lowered into the birth pool, all the pressure on my pelvis just lifted. It was like the most relief I have felt in my entire life. So I spent a few hours in there just having contractions, swapping from on my belly to having some lying back like this. And then things sort of slowed down a little bit, which was kind of expected. I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I cannot go on. But at the same time, knowing that I couldn't go back, there was no going back. So there was not a single point during my labour that I thought that I needed to transfer. There was not a single point where I was like, wow, maybe I should have an epidural. It just wasn't on my brain at all. It felt so natural to be going through the process, even though it was painful. In fact, the pain that I felt was like when you have a really tight hamstring or a really tight muscle somewhere and you stretch it, and it's that like painful stretching feeling. But I knew that it was normal and it felt normal. Rachel got me out. She just wanted to have another look and see where everything was at. So we went onto the bed and she said I was almost fully dilated, but the lower right half of my cervix was just lipped over her head. So during one contraction she tried to like hold that lip back so that it would move out of the way, and she got maybe halfway through the contraction and I just could not do it anymore. So we got back in the pool and I had more contractions, but I had my right knee up and my left knee down so that it was still trying to pull that last part out of the way. And I think it was around 7:30 that my waters actually broke, but I have no concept of it, so I wasn't focused on it. And it was around that time that I felt everything kind of shift, and I started having little urges to push, and then eventually it became a big urge. Like during the contraction I was like, oh okay, I need to push now. So I was leaning against the pool like over like that, and I still had my right knee up and I had my left knee down, and Rachel was sitting sort of behind me, and she was watching everything. The mirror was on the bottom of the pool, and each contraction she was saying, big pushes, now slow down and just do little pushes with your breath. Anyway, that went on for quite some time, and then Rachel told me that she was starting to come out, and so I reached down and I could feel the beautiful head of hair under there, and I had a few more contractions where I had my hand down there and I could feel her head coming out, just sort of sliding out, and then she actually didn't really go back very far back in. She sort of slid out and then stayed there, slid a little bit further out and stayed there. And then when the pushing stage started, I remember feeling like, you know, such a strong urge to push, but at the same time, like at the outside, it was like the stretching feeling again. And I remember like leaning over there, and I think I had Mum's hand in one hand and Eleanor's dad in the other hand, and I was leaning over and I was like, oh owie, it's so sore. And Rachel was like, it's a good sore, you just need to push through it. And once her head was out, everything seemed to go really quickly, and I can't really remember it that well, but I felt her head come out and then the body came out, and I just remember lying back in the birth pool like this and just feeling like all the pressure and all the power that had been going on in my body was just all gone, and then all of a sudden I just felt like a wave of relief came over my body. It was so lovely. And I looked around the room and pretty much everyone in the room was sobbing except for me. I was the only one that wasn't sobbing. For a split second I remembered like coming back to consciousness and hearing in the background Aliens by Coldplay playing, which I'd actually listened to so much during my pregnancy, so it was just a coincidence that it came on just as she was born. It was the most beautiful entrance into the world for her. I didn't stay in the birth pool long because the water had gotten quite cold, so we got out and I laid down on the bed with her, and within an hour I think the placenta was born, and that didn't take long at all. I sort of just got off the bed and squatted, and next thing you know, there it was. So I think in total I had basically a full day of pre-labour, which was all of Saturday, a full day of early labour, which is all of Sunday, a full day or 10 hours or so of active labour, but active labour sort of didn't start until 10 o'clock I think on Monday morning, so it was quite full on. I think the pushing stage was about an hour or so, but it certainly didn't feel like that at the time. I think the biggest thing with my birth is I had such an incredible support network around me, and if I was to go through it all again, I would not change a single thing. I loved how everything unfolded, and I loved that I was able to walk around home and take the space that I needed, and I didn't have any pressure from anyone. I didn't have any pressure from doctors or nurses that I needed to sit down, I needed to be checked. I was only checked if I gave Rachel the okay. So she got a bit hungry, which is expected. I did so much planning and research into this, and I think that's why it ended the way it did. I spent so many hours looking into all the stuff that I wanted and making decisions about what I thought was best for me and best for the whole experience. I have one recommendation for anyone who's planning to have a baby or is pregnant. Read the book Birth with Confidence by Rhea Dempsey. It applies to anyone, whether they're planning to have a home birth or a hospital birth. It's got such an empowering message and gives you a really good idea of what steps you can have in place to get the birth that you want and what your birthrights are. It gives you the confidence to birth the way you want to birth. My mum actually read it and she got so much out of it, as did I. I'll leave a link in the description box below to purchase a book from Mama Services, the midwife service I used. I'll also leave a link to the blog post I wrote, the 4 books that I read during pregnancy. That one's included there. It gives you a bit more of an insight of what is actually in the book. Check that out if you want to do a bit more research on birthing, home birthing, etc. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the pregnancy to home birth video that I made, just click this box here and that'll take you to it. Thanks again.